Imagine walking through a bustling medieval city, Paris, London, or Florence, and realizing that the air around you isn't just filled with the sound of carts and bells, but with an overwhelming cloud of smells. The streets reek of waste, smoke, and sweat, yet from the upper windows drifts the sweet aroma of rosewater and musk. People weren't bathing, but they were perfuming. Why? Because in the Middle Ages, scent was survival. Perfume wasn't luxury, it was medicine. Morality and status all in one bottle in this story. We'll step quietly into that world, through the cobbled alleys, past the church incense, into the royal chambers to discover why medieval people feared water, trusted fragrance, and believed that a good scent could save the soul. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's drift back in time to uncover why. For centuries, perfume was more important than bathing. If you could close your eyes and find yourself walking down a cobbled street in a medieval European city, Paris, London, Florence, or Cologne, the first thing you would notice would not be the sights, but the smells. The scent of life itself, raw and unfiltered, lingered in the air like a permanent fog. There were open drains, piles of refuse, the odor of animals, tanneries, and smoke. Even in the grandest towns, waste was tossed from windows, chamber pots emptied into narrow alleys, and the rain carried it downhill into sluggish rivers. It was not a world of cleanliness. It was a world of survival. And in this world, perfume was not luxury, it was necessity. Bathing, that most natural of human habits, was viewed with suspicion. There was a time long before the late medieval period, when public baths thrived in Europe, an inheritance from the Roman Empire. Marble pools and steam-filled chambers were once the mark of civilization. But by the 12th and 13th centuries, the communal bathhouse had taken on a different meaning. The church saw these spaces not as sites of hygiene, but as dens of temptation. Nakedness, even for the sake of cleanliness, became morally dangerous. And as the centuries passed, another fear grew, the fear of illness. Doctors and scholars of the Middle Ages believed in a theory known as miasma, that disease spread through foul air. If the air itself could bring sickness, then bathing, which opened the pores, would make the body more vulnerable to infection. Water was not cleansing. It was contaminating. Thus, across Europe, people washed less and perfumed more. Perfume in the medieval world was not the fine bottled fragrance we imagine today. It was a complex system of scent that permeated clothing, furniture, and even faith. For the wealthy, perfumes were distilled from flowers, resins, and animal substances like musk or civet. These ingredients came from faraway lands, Arabia, Persia, India, carried by merchants along spice routes and through Mediterranean ports. Frankincense and myrrh from Yemen, rose oil from Damascus, ambergris from the Indian Ocean, all became prized treasures. To wear them was to display not only wealth but protection, a barrier of scent against decay. Disease and evil in the homes of nobles. There were chambers of perfume, small rooms filled with herbs, oils, and distilling apparatus. Servants burned incense in the corners to sweeten the air. Linen was washed in scented waters of rosemary, sage, or vinegar. Clothes were stored with sachets of dried flowers. Leather gloves were soaked in oil so that when one gestured, the faint trace of scent followed through the air. To smell pleasant was to show that one was disciplined, pious, and refined. To smell foul was to betray one's sin, poverty, or neglect. And so, Europe began to mask its filth with fragrance in the 14th century. When the Black Death swept through towns and cities, the belief in perfume's power grew stronger. Doctors carried pomanders, small perforated metal balls filled with aromatic herbs or resins. They pressed them to their noses, convinced that the sweet smell could purify the deadly air. Some physicians wore long bird-like masks stuffed with dried flowers and spices, a strange marriage of medicine and superstition. Common people, unable to afford rare perfumes, burned juniper or pine in their hearths, or carried sprigs of lavender and rosemary. In the shadow of death, scent became a kind of prayer. But it was not only the fear of disease that made perfume essential, it was the very rhythm of life. Washing oneself required water, fire, soap, and privacy, all luxuries in short supply. For most people, water was fetched by hand, heavy and precious. Soap, made from animal fat and lye, was harsh on the skin and reserved for laundry. Instead, people cleaned themselves by rubbing with linen or with powders made from crushed herbs and starch. A fine dusting of perfume or rosewater finished the ritual. The result was a body not clean, but perfumed enough to pass among others. At the upper levels of society, this habit became art. Perfumed gloves were one of the great innovations of Renaissance Italy, particularly in Florence and Venice. The process was elaborate leather softened with oil, scented with amber, civet, and jasmine, and left to absorb the fragrance for weeks. When worn, these gloves released scent with every movement. The practice spread to France, where Catherine de' Medici made perfumed gloves fashionable among the royal court. To be near the queen was to breathe in a cloud of musk and rose, but the origin of Europe's perfume obsession lay further east. The knowledge of distillation, the process that allowed oils to be extracted from flowers, was perfected by Arab chemists during the Islamic Golden Age. Figures like Al-Kindi and Avicenna recorded recipes for aromatic waters and ointments in detailed treatises. They distilled roses, camphor, and spices, not only for beauty but for medicine. Their perfumes were light, floral, and clean. When this knowledge reached Europe through trade and the Crusades, the art of scent transformed from simple herbal remedies to refined luxury. Yet in Europe, the function of perfume diverged. For Muslims, scent was tied to ritual cleanliness, bathing, and purification before prayer. For Christians in the Middle Ages, scent became a replacement for washing altogether. The very act of smelling good was equated with spiritual goodness. Churches burned incense to purify the air. Saints were said to emit pleasant scents upon death, an aroma of holiness. Meanwhile, the living relied on perfume to disguise the earthly body beneath the sacred robe. A noblewoman might bathe once or twice a month, but every day she refreshed her linen, applied scented oils to her wrists and neck, and combed her hair with perfumed powder. Even her bed was prepared with herbs, lavender, mint, or marjoram sprinkled between the sheets. The air in her chamber might be perfumed with a small brazier of burning incense, or with vinegar boiled with rosemary and cloves to cleanse the humors in England. Queen Elizabeth I was famous for her love of perfume. Her chambers were said to be filled with bowls of dried flowers and sweet herbs, and she used perfume so heavily that visitors could smell her presence before she entered a room. But her fondness for fragrance was not unique. It was part of the broader European belief that scent defined civility. For the poor, fragrance came from the earth itself. Workers rubbed their hands with parsley or thyme to remove the smell of sweat. Women boiled their laundry with lavender or sage if they could afford it. The boundary between the perfumed and the unwashed was social as much as physical. In the villages, bathing might still take place in streams or barrels, but in cities, where water was foul and disease common, perfume was the safer choice. Even in death, perfume followed the body. Corpses were anointed with scented oils and wrapped with herbs before burial. Churches stored incense for funerals, and tombs were lined with fragrant wood to mask decay. The scent of death, like the scent of life, was something to be conquered. By the 5th-10th century, perfume had evolved into an entire industry. The apothecaries of Venice, Montpellier, and Florence produced aromatic waters, pastilles, and scented oils. Recipes circulated through Europe: rosewater for the skin, vinegar of 4 thieves for protection, Hungary water for youth. Hungary water, supposedly created for Queen Elizabeth of Hungary, was a mixture of rosemary and wine, believed to restore vitality and beauty. It became one of Europe's first alcohol-based perfumes. and people used it both externally and internally, drinking it as medicine and rubbing it on the face as fragrance. As the Renaissance dawned, personal hygiene slowly began to change, but the medieval logic remained. Perfume still carried moral and medical meaning. To anoint oneself was to maintain order over the body, to discipline it against the natural chaos of the world. Water could wash the skin, but perfume could wash the soul. Even as cities built aqueducts and wells improved, the habit of perfuming instead of bathing persisted. In France, the court of Louis XIV became infamous for its perfumed excess. The Sun King reportedly bathed rarely but demanded that his rooms, clothes, and even furniture be perfumed daily. His courtiers followed suit, and entire rooms at Versailles were dedicated to distilling scents. It was said that one could smell the king's court before one could see it. The irony, of course, is that many of these perfumes were made from animal products: musk from deer glands, civet from cats, ambergris from whales. The nobility, in their pursuit of cleanliness and refinement, surrounded themselves with the hidden scents of animals. What perfume offered was not hygiene, but illusion of fragrant veil between the human body and the world. It told others that you were above filth, untouched by the common stench of existence. It was in essence a declaration of control. But perhaps the most revealing part of this history lies not in what people wore, but in how they thought about scent itself. Medieval scholars believed that smells carried moral qualities. Sweet scents elevated the soul. Foul odors corrupted it. To smell good was to be good. A saintly person, it was said, gave off an odor of sanctity, a divine fragrance even after death. Churches burned incense not simply to mask odors, but to symbolize holiness. The spiritual world, they believed, smelled sweet, while the infernal one reeked of sulfur, and so perfume became more than fashion. It became theology. Over the centuries, the line between perfume and medicine blurred completely. Perfumed oils were prescribed for headaches, melancholy, and heart palpitations. Aromatic baths were recommended not to cleanse, but to restore balance to the humors. Even vinegar scented with herbs was believed to ward off plague. Apothecaries sold aromatic waters, simple mixtures of herbs and alcohol, to both nobles and merchants. It was a trade built not only on fragrance but on fear, in a world without. Soap and sanitation. Perfume became the one thing that could make life bearable. The heavy smells of humanity, of work, of sickness, of animals were too constant to ignore. Scent offered a reprieve, however temporary. To perfume oneself was to rise above the stench of the world. And yet, for all its importance, perfume could never truly cleanse. Beneath the rosewater and musk, the medieval body remained the same, sweating, breathing, mortal. The fragrant world of the Middle Ages was a world of contradiction. A civilization obsessed with purity, yet afraid of water. Devoted to scent, yet surrounded by filth. When we imagine medieval Europe, it is easy to think of knights and castles. But perhaps the truest image is one of layers of fabrics and oils, of herbs and incense. A world where scent replaced soap, where a pomander was a shield, and where a drop of rose oil could carry the illusion of paradise. Perfume, in that sense, was a dream, a fragile, fragrant rebellion against the inevitable decay of the human condition. And though centuries have passed, that dream remains with us. Today, we still wear perfume, not to survive the stench of medieval streets, but to shape the air around us, to declare who we are, or who we wish to be. Yet if we close our eyes and breathe deeply, the lineage of that habit remains, stretching back through the centuries to a time when water was feared and scent was salvation. Perfume was never just a fragrance. In the Middle Ages, it was identity, protection, and prayer, all captured in a single breath. If you're still here, thank you for listening and for spending a little quiet time in history with me tonight. I hope this story helped you unwind, and maybe even taught you something small and strange about how people once lived. If you enjoyed this slow walk through the past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Quiet Boring Sleep. It really helps more sleepy history lovers find their way here. Every week, we explore the calm, uneventful corners of history, the quiet routines, forgotten crafts, and ordinary lives that shaped our world in the gentlest ways. So, until next time, rest well, dream softly, and let the past fade into the hush of the night. Good night from Quiet Boring Sleep.